Welcome, listeners, to a realm where shadows dance and whispers echo. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and this is Quills and Chills, the podcast that brings you face to face with the masterminds behind the macabre. In each episode, we journey into the minds of horror writers and filmmakers to uncover the secrets lurking within their tales of terror. From classic tales to modern nightmares, we'll traverse the corridors of the human psyche and unravel the threads of dread that keep us turning the pages or sitting out there in the dark. Welcome to Quills and Chills. Hello and welcome back to Quills and Chills. I'm your host, Rick Clifton, and today I am absolutely thrilled to have Bijhan Agha joining me again for the third time. Bijhan first came to the show to talk to me about Time Wars, the adventures of Cobra Olympus, and then returned to talk about the legendary X Knights. And now Bijhan is back to talk about her latest project, Gray and Saturn Olympus. So let's get ready to dive in, shall we? Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I always love talking to you. It's always a lot of fun. So I'm glad that you could come back and do this. So why don't we start off, before we dive into Gray and Saturn Olympus, why don't we start off with maybe a little bit of a quick reminder about the Time Wars universe itself?
Yeah, so one of the things I loved as a kid was all different kinds of genre media. So, of course, when I'm going to make a comic book, it's going to combine every genre I can think of. So it's got a little bit of time travel, a little bit of history, and a little bit of horror. So the premise is that humanity and vampire kind are locked in an endless battle to try and control the fate of the Earth, and that time travelers from the distant future are coming back in time and recruiting people, both vampires and humans, to try and perpetuate these battles in different time periods. So it's an epic that stretches all the way from the dawn of humanity into the deep future in the era of time travel.
I love it. You know, I was on board from the first time you pitched it to me. I was like, yes, we have to do this. So it's a great, I love this universe that you've created, and I want to hear more about the latest. So let's talk about Gray and Saturn Olympus.
Yeah, so it's actually a spin-off of a novel I wrote that's available on our Patreon. We can set the links in the description. It's patreon.com/Jamsheed Studios, Jamsheed, Jamsheed. And in the novel, it's about Harriet Tubman and John Brown collecting the 19th century's greatest warriors to try and go up against the greatest vampire warriors of that era. And some of the supporting characters were Gray, and Saturn Olympus. And so now they're getting their own comic book talking about them being a gay, interracial, interfaith married couple in 1873. And they've hunted so many vampires using alien technology that now the vampires are starting to hunt them back.
Oh.
And they have a new bounty hunter on their trail named Alice, who's more machine than vampire. The only thing left of her that's biological is her brain and her vampire parasite that sucks blood.
Wow. I love it. All right. So this gay, interracial, interfaith dynamic now, and it's also set in a sci-fi Western setting.
Yes.
I gotta know, like, what inspired you to blend all of these elements together, and how does it sort of, how do you fit that all into the narrative? I mean, it's I love it. It's so unique and so much fun.
Well, there's nothing new under the sun, and everything is really remixed culture. So one of my favorite shows growing up was Star Trek, the original series. And that's already a sci-fi Western. They originally pitched it as Wagon Train to the Stars. But the idea of I love the idea of having the science fiction world where, because you're out in space, there's all this space in between civilization. So when you're out there, you're really alone, and you're using all the sci-fi gadgets to try and survive. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of invert that. So instead of using space as a metaphor for the Wild West, I use the Wild West as a metaphor for all the different aspects of humanity and the isolation and togetherness that we feel in real life, and added lots of sci-fi gadgets. So the main gadgets in the story are Ash has what's called a phasing stone, which is something he stole from an alien hunter. That happens in the novel, and it allows him to teleport instantly to any place he can think of. And then
can I get one?
Yeah, right. And then Saturn So Saturn, I love this story. So you only get little glimpses of it in the comic, but in the book we go into more detail. His mother freed herself from being enslaved, and she took the Metamorphosis by Ovid as her holy book. So she abandoned her previous name and she became Juno Olympus. And she joined a coven of witches who also fight vampires.
Ooh.
And they use alien technology to create all kinds of weapons to fight the vampires with. And when she gave birth, Saturn, the boy she gave birth to, he had a birth condition that caused his limbs to be very small. So the coven of witches that worked with the vampire hunters from the future, they created, using alien technology, robot prosthetics for him to use. So he has his very small natural limbs inside these incredibly powerful and advanced alien prosthetics that allow him to do all kinds of incredible athletic feats.
I got to tell you, I've said it before, I'm saying it again. I love the way your brain works. This is fantastic stuff. So it's exactly it's right up my alley. So let's talk a little bit about Ash, Gray, and Saturn Olympus themselves. How did their individual journeys intersect? How did they come together? And what challenges do they face? So just about 3 questions. You can choose whichever one you want to start with.
So there's a chapter early on in the novel, Legends of the Order, where we get to see when Ash and Saturn first meet. And what happens is that there's an alien race that lives near Earth relative to the vastness of space. And they're called the Saloon. And one of the things they do is they are game hunters. And so they look like these humongous anthropomorphic bears. They're about 12 feet tall. And they have extremely advanced technology, and they have no interest in contacting other civilizations to conduct deals or negotiations or cultural exchanges. All they want to do is land on a planet and see how many they can kill and bring back their bones as trophies. So what happens is that Ash and Saturn are actually originally from the same town, but the difference being that as a white person, Ash was completely segregated from the black people in the community. This is a small town in Mississippi. And when Saturn was born, he was born outside of the community because his mother was living in isolation with her coven. And so even though they're from the same place, they had never really met. And it wasn't until this saloon game hunter comes down and massacres everyone in the town. The only people that are on the fringes are the 2 queer people, Ash and Saturn. And so they're outside of town when the massacre begins, and they're the only ones left to stand up against the alien and try and prevent the rampage from going on further.
So it sounds great. And it's also, I know you've described this as an action-packed romance thriller. And so I want to talk a little bit about that aspect of it, if we can. I'd love to know how you balance these high-stake action sequences with this very nuanced romantic relationship between both Ash, Gray, and Saturn Olympus.
Well, one of my favorite things about different kinds of action media, I think this is something that actually Japanese media does really, really well, is it causes the action to be informed by the relationships happening during the dramatic moments. That when they're fighting, you're really thinking about why they're fighting this person and what is at stake whether they win or lose. So when I have these scenes with them communicating about their different wants and needs for the future, their different visions of how things work because they're different religions. Ash is a non-denominational Christian and Saturn is a Hellenist. The fact that they're so invested in each other's well-being means that when someone starts throwing fists or someone starts shooting bullets, you know that they're not just going to lose someone that they know. You know all the things about the future that they want with each other, all the things that they need from each other that they would lose if the other person were to perish. And so the whole idea is that without the relationship between them, you don't get to see what the stakes are for the battle. People live, people die, people are murdered, and we don't feel very deeply about numbers and statistics, right? They say, one person dying is a tragedy, 1 million people dying is a statistic. So the whole point is we need to get to know who these people are and what they mean to each other, what the life they look forward to with each other is, so that when the bullets start flying, you know why the other person would even care.
And what's really at stake, and just feel it, the connection. So
yeah, exactly.
So you brought up their faith, and I'd love to talk a little bit about incorporating the interfaith themes, because that is not always easy. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this, like, has that ever been done before in a comic? I don't know, and I don't know if you know, but I'd love to know how you approached it and sort of how you portray those throughout the story.
Well, I'm in an interfaith relationship myself, so that was largely my inspiration.
Personal experience. I love it.
Yeah. My partner is a secular Jewish person, and I am a non-theistic Muslim. So we have very weird and very specific beliefs. But the main thing I wanted to display was that it really doesn't need to be as complicated as a lot of people make it out to be, because the vast majority of people, if you can imagine yourself in a relationship with that other person, I'm assuming you have compatible values, regardless of where you think those values come from, right? So the whole concept is that these are two men who believe that you need to enact justice in the world, that justice isn't a thing that exists outside of us, that in order to make the world a better place, you have to take concrete steps and perform specific actions and commit yourself to making the world better than when you found it. And that means much more to them than whether that order is coming from Jupiter or whether that order is coming from Jesus. And so the moral commandment to do good in the world means everything to them. And the fact that the other person believes that the origin of that commandment is a different deity does not mean anything to them.
That's exactly right. And I love the personal connection to it as well. I love that you brought that in. So I want to talk a little bit more. You touched on it a little bit earlier about the sort of sci-fi Western aspect, and we talked about Star Trek and all of that. What aspects of this genre do you find most appealing for this story? And let's talk a little bit about building that world and those characters within that genre.
Yeah, I think that the Western genre has too often been dominated by sort of Ayn Randian nonsense, where you've got this rugged individual who goes out and conquers the wilderness and really just is so much better than everyone else. Everyone else just falls behind and they're just not as good. Then it takes this really good, amazing, perfect person to just conquer the wilderness. And I really wanted to push back against that idea, because I don't think it's compatible with some of the oldest Western stories. Some of them, if you go back in time and you watch the Westerns that are like black and white, and there's like tons of shows, like even Zorro, right? The classic black and white action adventure series. There is this sense that whatever that person is doing when they're out there, messing with the rugged wilderness, and they're doing it for two reasons. One, because there are people close to them who need them to do that, right? It's not individualism, it's collectivism. It's not about a rugged individual conquering things. It's about someone going out there and getting the resources they need for people who can't do it for themselves. And the other aspect is that they are suffering. They're in a bad situation because of a lack of society. That's one of the reasons why my formal education is in the law. And one of the things I noticed was that the further west you go, the more comprehensive the castle doctrine is, the rules about whether or not you can defend yourself in a physical confrontation. In the East, you have a lot of legal requirements to have to remove yourself from the situation. But in the West, when the laws were being made, you had no real hope of anyone coming to intercede on your behalf, because everyone lived so far apart. So in the West, when the laws were made, it was much more important that people had the legal right to defend themselves without fear of legal consequence afterward. So the thing that people forget is that the Wild West wasn't a free place for people to be exactly who they wanted to be. It was a cruel and really oppressive place, because people were completely beholden to their physical needs, and that dominated every aspect of life. and they didn't have infrastructure to rely on in order to keep themselves healthy and safe and sane. They didn't have people to call on when they needed help with labor or with defending themselves. So the isolation of being a Western settler meant that people who otherwise could thrive in a very civilized place were instead perishing by the thousands. So I wanted to show that these people who have decided to love each other in the face of absolute total non-acceptance of the outside world are not having a great and wonderful time because they're good dudes and it's a free place. I wanted to show that they are struggling and that they are having a hard time because the Wild West was wild. It was not calm, it was not collected, it was not rule abiding, it was wild. And so that's what I really wanted to show.
I love it. They're not tiptoeing through or frolicking in the meadows or tiptoeing through the daisies or whatever. It's literally a fight for life and death.
Exactly.
I love it. So I want to talk a little bit about the illustrations and the artwork. I know that artists always play a huge role in bringing comics to life. And the couple times that we've talked in the past, we never really talked about this. And I was thinking about this when I was putting together my questions for you. I'd love to talk about who are your illustrators, who's doing the illustration, and if you could talk a little bit of give them a shout out.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you go to our Kickstarter page, we'll talk about that later. At the very bottom of the page, it has our crew, and it will have links to the social media for the illustrators. So for Cobra Olympus and Legendary X Knights, I was working with Swap Trap, who is a wonderful illustrator from India. And we were able to do a very cool sort of retro style that was very evocative of the Golden and Silver Age, with big, thick lines and flat colors. For this comic, Swap Trap was already working on Cobra 3. So we're already on board with that. So Cobra issue 3 is in the works. So we needed another artist to be able to make this comic in the meantime. And I had worked with this artist in the past. His name is Ardiman, and he's also from India. And he had a completely different vision for the art style, and I loved it. And he was mostly inspired by the 1980s French and Spanish comics. In particular, heavy metal was a big inspiration. But at the same time, he also has experience with colored shading. So what we were able to do is we were able to thin out these typically big, thick black lines, keep the general vibe of the sort of indie 60s, Iberian Peninsula kind of stuff. And what we have is in the action scenes, we're going to have some pretty straightforward coloring because we want it to be bold and dynamic. But in the intimate scenes where they're talking, we're going to have really beautiful shading that really brings them to life and is much more rich in color than we've been doing with the other comics. And I felt like that was really necessary because the inspiration for Cobra and for Legendary X Knights is really rooted in nostalgic comics. And I wanted to just do something more modern with Ash and Saturn. So we drew some nostalgia from the 80s Western European comics, but we also went pretty far in the direction of more modern comics with digital shading and really complex coloring. We're not sticking to a single palette, so each page gets to have its own vibe. It's really fun. So yeah, Ardiman is the name of this artist, and he's doing an amazing job.
I mean, the preview artwork that I've seen so far is absolutely gorgeous. What is the collaboration process like on the illustration? How does it work? Do they come in and take the story and then go away and process it and come back and pitch you ideas, or is it very collaborative in the beginning? How does that sort of work?
So it's very interesting. I think I'm the only person using this technique right now. I don't know if anyone else is using this technique, but I'm not the worst artist in the world. So I'm using what's called the modified Picar method. Sorry, I think I just heard something loud coming out of it. I live in Montevideo, Uruguay, and it is not a quiet city. So
we'll fix it. Don't worry.
So Harvey Picar was an American comic creator. He did slice of life comics, and people are always surprised that he's such an influence on me because I never make slice of life comics. I make science fiction, horror, all kinds of stuff. But I love American Splendor, his comics. And Harvey Picar, he would just tell autobiographical stories about his life, but he was not an artist that was competent enough to create a finished product. So what he would do is he would take a page, a piece of paper, and he would draw stick figures on it and write in the word bubbles. And so it would look like a crude version of what he ultimately wanted to make. And then he would hand that to the artist, and he had lots of different artists he worked with. He would hand that to the artist, and then the artist would then make that come to life. So I'm doing something that I call it the modified P-card method, because it's not exactly that. So what I do is I make those illustrations, but on top of those my crude illustrations and the word bubbles and everything like that, on top of that, I also make a document that is the script, where I type out what is being said, because who knows if my handwriting is the best. And then I
have the same issue.
Yeah. And then I also type out what I was trying to draw. So not only do they have the physical drawing that I've made with, a little smiley face with a little cowboy hat, but I also am saying, he's supposed to look angry, and I really want the lighting to be more red, so I can type out exact instructions on that. And that way the artist knows not just what the panel should look like, but also how they should be arranged and how much space is going to be needed for there to be text above, below, to the side. So then once they make the artwork, what they make with P-card, the artist would also be the letterer, but we don't. Yeah. So, P-card also, none of his comics were in color. So it was just pencils and inks, and the artist was almost always the letterer. But we wanted to do it differently. So the artist creates the finished page, sends it to me, and then I do the lettering. And so I'm the one who puts the words in the final place. And then they put word bubbles and boxes and balloons around it so it matches the art around it. So it's very directed by me, but I also know that there are creative decisions that have to be made that I'm not an expert enough to even know are decisions that need to be made. Like I try to tamp down on the Dunning-Kruger effect and be like, the wise person knows they know nothing. The wise person knows they know nothing. So as much as I know about art, I know that there's so much more that the artist knows. So when they come back to me with sketches, there's often something in there that's surprising me. Like maybe they chose a different angle because the angle I chose was, stiff or unexpressive. Maybe they chose colors that I wasn't expecting. Anything like that. Often I don't try to correct anything because they're usually way more spot on than I am. What do I know about any of that? So I try not to have. It's something that I learned about in filmmaking that I think applies in comic making as well. In filmmaking, they say when you're writing a script, don't try to direct from the typewriter.
Right.
So what I try to do is I try not to draw from the typewriter. I'm trying to give the artist information that's useful to the artist without dictating what they should do. And I also have conversations with them. We use Discord a lot and emails. And I just try to be like, if I say something that doesn't make sense or it's going to look bad, just ignore me. Like just do something different if you think that what I'm saying is a bad idea. So I encourage them to try and have more creative input than that. So
this all really resonates with me. I work in animation. That's in addition to this, my day job is in animation, and it's interesting. We have a very similar process and working in animation, and how artists and illustrators tend to inform a lot of those creative decisions, and in terms of it surprises me how much input they had on what a final scene will look like and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's really important because you have to trust the experts. And
exactly.
Yeah. And so my expertise is writing and paneling. And I know that has limits. I have a good idea of how the panel should be laid out. I have a good idea of how they should look together. But when it comes to the specific artwork, no one's going to know better than my artist.
I totally agree. And I think we've talked about this. So if we have, I'm happy to move on. But I was just kind of curious how artistic style or even creative input helps shape the story. Have there been, I know you talked about sometimes they make creative decisions about how things may play out, but has there ever been a moment where it's completely changed the story and you're like, oh, you know what, maybe we do this instead of that, or any moments like that?
Well, it's very interesting. So I actually had something that I had planned totally one way, and it came out a totally different way in the comic. So in the very first Cobra comic, and this is when we were just really figuring out the process, I had this idea in my head that Dorothy, Cobra's love interest, would fidget with her ear when she was nervous. And after a couple of pages came in, I realized that it actually kind of looked like she was playing with her hair and being confident. And so I realized that it actually made the story a little more solid in having her be confident in those moments, because Cobra 1 has been out for a while, so it's not too much of a spoiler to say that at the end Dorothy writes Cobra and says that they'd like to see her again. And so the idea that she was totally not confident, that she was totally just fidgeting the whole time, made that seem almost come out of nowhere, whereas having her be more confident during the date actually was sort of a prelude, sort of sets up the idea that she wants to see Cobra again. So yeah, definitely it was just such a small change in the mannerism, and it completely changed the feel of the romance in the comic. So I just love that.
Those are my favorite moments, when things come up that you've never even considered before, and you're like, wow, it just completely changes the direction of everything. So
Yeah.
some of my favorite moments. So, you do something really, really, really well that I know we've talked about before, but I'm not gonna not talk about it this time. I want to talk about representation. I think that it is a recurring theme in your work. I absolutely love it. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, especially in these days and times, why it's important to showcase diverse characters and the impact that you hope that these characters will have on marginalized communities in particular.
I think that when I'm making a comic, I want everything to be intentional. I don't want anything to be an accident. I don't want anyone to accidentally be white or black or Asian or Chinese. I don't want anyone to accidentally be gay. I don't want it to be something that is just a lamp in the background of the scene. So every time I decide a character's, background, character's sexuality, gender presentation, I have to tie that into how did that inform their experiences, right? If they're trans, that means that they went on a certain journey. If they're cis, that means that they did not go on that journey, and that should inform who they are as people. And I think especially because Time Wars jumps around in the timeline, I wanted to explore what those things have meant in the past and could mean in the future.
Love that.
So
Love that.
So, for example, I'm currently working on a new Time Wars novel that's set in about 10,000 years from now in the space age. And the characters from the deep future, where it's time travel is possible, are from the 161st century. So I'm wanted to sort of compare and contrast that the characters from the 161st century have ideas of gender, sex, and sexuality that are fundamentally incompatible with our perception of reality. That they're so far beyond us that they're actually further past us in evolution than we are to Homo neanderthalis.
Love that.
And that the characters from 10,000 years in the future still look at them in awe because they still have gender and sexuality, even though it's nothing like what we have today. For example, one of the characters in the story is a cis man, and that makes him functionally queer in their society because nobody else is. So we would consider him a cis man, but because his society was built on, he lives on a planet far away from Earth, nobody's ever been to Earth, but from who's been around him. They've all lived on this planet for thousands of years, and they just don't accept masculinity. So when he comes up and he's masculine, he's functionally queer in their society.
I love that little twist. Yeah.
And now in Ash and Saturn, we get to explore how that works in the past. So, one, people just notice a black man and a white man traveling together. That's just something that they'll notice, and people will bring up what's happening. Why is this? It's so unusual that I need an explanation. And even though there is no real explanation, they're just two men in love. The fact that they're different races doesn't mean anything, but people are so primed for it to mean something. So people are so expectant that race is going to be such a large part of anyone's relationship that they can't help but wonder why is this? Why are those things? And one of the first things that happens in the new comic is they order a one bed bedroom at the tavern. And the lady goes, well, two men with one bed? And Ash, not missing a beat because he knows she's Christian based on context, he says, don't you know your Bible, madam? We have a covenant just like Jonathan and David. So, and that's the way that if you were two gay men in 1873, the covenant between Jonathan and David would probably be your strongest point of reference for what your emotions meant, especially as a gay Christian man who had read the Bible back and forth, up and down, every single which way. He could recognize and identify that the way he felt about his husband was almost identical to the way Jonathan felt about David and David felt about Jonathan. So we now currently have these words like queer and gay and LGBT, and we have all this phraseology that we've built up over generations. But in 1873, he had to relate it to something concrete in his life. He had to use language that he understood. So the idea of him being a white, gay, Christian man means that he uses different ways of thinking about himself and his relationship to the world and his relationship to his husband. And those are the things I want to explore. That's the meat on the bone of the story. The story is the bone. It gives it shape. It gives it, somewhere to go, something to do. But all the action, all the adventure is all meaningless. It's all flavorless. It's just action without thinking about how these characters think about themselves in the context of their world. And that's why I wanted to make so many different Time Wars comics, is because I wanted to show, and novels, because I wanted to show how people have had thought about themselves and very well could think about themselves in the future.
Fabulous. Like I said, it's something I feel that you do really, really well, and I love it. And hearing you talk about it just is always the highlight of my day. So I could never explain it or express it as well as you do. So I love what you're doing, and please keep doing it.
Thank you. I certainly will. I don't think I could stop if I tried.
That's fantastic. So looking ahead a little bit, tell us a little bit, are there any further stories coming with Ash and Saturn, or maybe new characters in the Time Wars universe that you can talk about? I know stuff is happening all the time and we can't always talk about what's coming, but.
So I haven't actually announced this, so I guess you'll be the debut of this.
Yes. Maybe I'll do a big debut graphic.
So. That'd be great. Yeah. So what's happening is the current spate of comics are going to be part of what we call the Time Wars Tome Volume 1. So Cobra Olympus, Legendary X Knights, Ash and Saturn, and a new one that's coming out this fall called 0 and 1. They're all going to be part of, they're each going to be a 6-issue miniseries, and collected, they're going to be a one huge graphic novel that we will be releasing in about 7 years. So we're going to be releasing one issue of each every year until they're all collected. And so 0 and 1 is more of the deep future stuff, where I was talking about where they're post-gender. And in this one, I wanted to get into non-human stuff. So the premise of 0 and 1 is it's an Ellimorph story. So the Ellimorphs are living robots that can change form as they gather energy. And what happened was there's a planet called Alentia in the deep future. And Alentia is inhabited by humans. It's a human colony, but the colony collapses and the few survivors leave. And what they leave behind are robots with the capacity to gain energy from the environment around them and reproduce. And as they reproduce, they mutate. They physically construct more of themselves out of raw materials, and they make little baby versions of themselves. And as those baby versions collect more energy from the environment around them, they grow into new forms that are then able to construct more babies. And they're called Ellimorphs. Ellimorphs because each one gains power from a certain element. So if it's a fire type, then that means that it literally consumes lava and fire. But if it's a water type, it'll have a turbine inside of it so that when it sits in the current pushes its turbine and powers its body.
Wow.
So the idea I wanted to have with this is to have a society that we recognize as a society that is fundamentally different from any kind of human terrestrial organism, any kind of organism that we would find on Earth, because they're so different from us. So Elomorphs obviously have all, because why would a robot need it? They don't have any kind of gender expression. They're not masculine and they're not feminine. They are just beings that have personalities. They can talk to each other. They can form communities, but they've never felt a need, and they've never had a need to have anything resembling human gender or sexuality. And so Zero is a human pilot from Mars who crash lands on Alentia. And a series of hidden clues from the future start guiding them towards the ability to empower a new friend that they make, an Elomorph. And they have a language barrier. They can't talk to each other because they don't speak the same language. So they're constantly having to find ways to communicate other than the spoken word. And as they work together, they discover that the way off the planet also involves preventing the vampires from conquering Alentia and turning the Elomorphs into weapons to use in the Time Wars.
Wow. God, I love this. Look at this universe you put together.
And so this one's going to be illustrated by a Brazilian artist named Viteris, and he is going to be drawing a large inspiration from shonen manga, because obviously a large inspiration for us were things like Digimon and Pokemon. But I've always felt like they could have been fleshed out better and could have said more interesting things. Pokemon is fundamentally about people's relationship with nature, because they're animals and they're alive. But because it takes place in a world that's just sort of, it's our world, but way more perfect, and there's no social problems, and all the problems come from Pokemon, it has very little bite in its ability to make social commentary. And then Digimon has actually very good social commentary. I'm actually very happy with the amount of conversation that Digimon has had. But they've been very inconsistent about whether they're animals or people. And the societies that they show don't really seem to be fleshed out in ways that could be more meaningful commentary than when they're in the human world. So I just felt like I wanted to take the idea of a life form that's so fundamentally different from us and how we relate to that organism. And I wanted to take that idea and I wanted to translate it into a whole new concept where it's something that's, theoretically in 10,000 years, we could certainly invent a robot that could make more of itself. So I wanted to play within the realm of the imaginable, right? And that's not it's not Pokemon or Digimon, right? Those are literally impossible. No one's ever going to believe that there's ever going to be a Digimon or a Pokemon. But I wanted to play within the realm of the comprehensible and really explore what it meant to be a person dragged into a war that doesn't fundamentally involve you. So the Elomorphs themselves are a metaphor for people who become put in the crosshairs because of conflicts happening around them. And so the humans and the vampires are fighting over the fate of the Elomorphs, and the Elomorphs have to find a way to try and forge their own destiny in the face of such aggression.
This is fantastic. Like I said, you have built quite the universe here, and I'm super excited for it. So,
thank you.
So the Kickstarter campaign, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, where we can find it, how we can find it, and what can supporters expect in terms of rewards and contributions and all of that.
So we learned a lot about fulfillment this year on our last couple of projects. So I'm expecting that this next year, or this next comic, Gray and Saturn Olympus, we're going to have the lowest shipping costs, especially for international orders, that we've ever had before. We're going to be printing a very specific number of comics. We will not be going over a certain number of comics, and once they're spoken for, they're gone, because we want these to be collectibles. And it's very important to us that we support the physical industry. This last Kickstarter was the first time that we sold out of our retailers kit. So retailers can get a very discounted price. We are striving to make it as close to industry standard as possible, including shipping. So if you want to get just a digital comic, It's $1. You can also catch up with all of the digital comics that we've ever produced for $4. Then we'll have the individual comic for $6. For $7, you get 2, so that one can be kept in the bag and as a collectible, and the other one you can get greasy with your peanut butter and jelly fingers. and then we'll have the retailer's kit. There's several different options there in case you want to get promotional stuff. And we're also going to be having things like t-shirts and posters with unique artwork from different artists that we commissioned to get all different kinds of things. So there's going to be lots of fun add-ons. There's a video comic for people who have mobility issues. So yeah, one thing we found is that there were people who wanted to back us, but they physically could not hold a comic, and they had a hard time holding up a phone to read a PDF for a long period of time. So the video comic allows them to just put it on the screen, sit back and relax, and just have it read to them. So now, and I also try to make it fun. I add music, I add sound effects, so I try to make it as nice as possible. I was very happy with this last one.
Are you doing the VO, or do you get someone else to do it? Or do you do voices, the whole thing?
Yeah, it's all voiced. Yeah. So yeah, it gets fully read to you. So yeah. So
love it.
Yeah.
Fun.
And the t-shirts are going to have a unique chibi design that made by Chi-Chi, who is a great artist out of Chicago. And so they're going to have big, cute, adorable Ash, Gray, and Saturn figures, and it's going to be great. Oh, and if you want to find the campaign real easy without typing a bunch of stuff, jamsheedstudios.com, JAMSHEED. It'll have a big banner on the top. Just click the banner. It'll take you right there.
Fab. I'll put all this in the show notes, obviously, and for the video version of this, it'll be on screen as it has been in the past. And guys, go out and support this. Bijhan is doing amazing things. And my friend, I'm so glad you came and talked to me today, because it's always a joy to talk to you. And I am just super thrilled, and I'm very excited for Ash, Gray, and Saturn Olympus.
Oh, that's the nicest thing I've heard all week. I appreciate that.
I'll send you the recording of it, and then you can play it whenever you need it.
So, my emotional comfort clip.
I have a few of those of my own in my phone. Trust me. So most of mine are Wonder Woman, but whatever, you get that. You get that. So, well, again, thank you so much for your time and for coming to talk to me again. How can other than the Kickstarter, how can our audience find you online? Are you on social?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find my work is jamsheedstudios.com, JAMSHEED. That has a link to our Patreon, link to the current Kickstarter, and it also has an online store, and you can even get physical copies with print on demand. It's all there. And then for me personally, I am Bijhan Agha, Bijhan, on Blue Sky. That's the only one I use. So on Blue Sky, if you just type in Bijhan, I think I'm the only one that comes up. You'll know it's me because I'm the only person in the world with the BC Lions banner that's made in the gay rainbow colors. So
I love it. I'll include that with everything else as well. So, all right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time on Quills and Chills. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Quills and Chills. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the mysterious and the haunted. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to support us by subscribing on your preferred podcast platform and leaving us a rating or review, because your feedback helps keep those chills running down both our spines. And feel free to share the show with your favorite fellow horror enthusiasts. Also, if you guys have any spooky stories, strange encounters, or paranormal experiences of your own, I'd love to hear them. Reach out to me on social media or email me at quillsandchillspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Your story might end up on a very special episode. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you back here next time on Quills and Chills. Bye, y'all.